Hi, my name is Scott Syfax, and welcome to the Department of Sound's Sustainable Communities podcast series in partnership with SMUD. In this series, we embark on an exploration of SMUD's visionary mission and the remarkable individuals and organizations that are driving positive change in our vibrant Sacramento region. Today, we've got the privilege of introducing you to two exceptional guests whose journeys and work are making an indelible mark on our community. First, we have SMUD Board Vice President and longtime civic entrepreneur, Rosanna Herber. Welcome, Rosanna.
Thank you, Scott.
And secondly, we are honored to have the Executive Director of the Sacramento Tree Foundation, Jessica Sanders. Welcome, Jessica.
Thank you, Scott.
So, Jessica, I want to start with you.
Okay.
When you were 10 years old and you were thinking about all of the things that you might do in life, did you ever imagine that your mission was going to be working with trees?
No. Never. I think I wish I could say yes to that, but no, I'm the youngest of four. And so at 10, my oldest sister was in her 20s, and I was still going to the second oldest and the third oldest soccer games and things like that. And so I liked to read a lot, and I liked nature. And my mother loves trees. So I think at 10, we had a beautiful elm tree in our backyard, and my mother would do anything to keep her trees. So much so that I remember a tree company came in to trim the tree. And we didn't have very much money, but the trees were like a priority for my mom. And she got into a fight with my father because the tree care company found a lot of rot in the tree. So they said, you should remove it. It's going to fall on your house. And my mother stood there and cried because she didn't want her tree to come down. And finally, my father was like, yes, but we can't afford if the tree falls on our house. So it was, I think that was a really pivotal moment for me to recognize how much someone could love and care for their trees. So I do think part of that was sort of what started to get me on the path to do the environment and trees.
You know what's so interesting about that is that my story isn't identical, but in my backyard growing up, we had a Dutch elm. Mm-hmm. And in that era, there was a thing that came along called the Dutch elm disease.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yes.
And that was like the neighborhood tree. We all played, climbed, did tree houses, built tree houses, all that stuff. And when that tree came down, the entire neighborhood was sad. Kind of shows you.
Yeah.
And Rosanna, you know, I called you very intentionally in the introduction a civic entrepreneur because, you know, if there's ever a cause going on and you're around, somehow your arm always seems to go up, right?
Yes, that's true.
And you've lived many lives. I mean, but when you were first starting out and you were very young, did you imagine the adventures you'd have? I mean, elective office and all of the different things that you've done. What was your path going to be?
Well, you know, it's interesting. I'm the middle child of 13. So justice and fairness is a big deal for me. And I did feel like I would get into some kind of role where I would be balancing things. I also happen to be a Libra. So when I was a little kid, I remember writing songs. And one song that I wrote, I find hilarious today because it's the song that most elected officials sing, and that is, give me credit for the things I do, give me credit and not you. And it goes on. But, you know, to me, I love the work that I'm doing. I have always wanted to be a community person. I didn't think that I would get to be elected because I'm gay, and for a long time, you know, being gay was something that took that option off the table. When I worked for Kim Mueller, the councilwoman, the ash tree. What did we call it?
Modesta Ash. Yeah.
Modesta Ash. it totally destroyed a large part of our district. And that was one of the reasons why we started the Trees for Tomorrow campaign.
What was that? Tell us about that.
Let me tell you, Kimberly Mueller, she got elected to the council office. She beat an incumbent. I was her chief of staff. And when we started working with the neighborhoods, this infection just took away a lot of the trees. Mm-hmm. And so at that time, there was no Sacramento Tree Foundation. Kim started working with several of the developers, and there was, the Tree Foundation was being talked about, but it wasn't in its current form now, which is so strong. And so Kim went around, talked to developers, talked to community leaders, and we created the Trees for Tomorrow campaign. The goal was to plant 1 million trees by the year 2000. Well, we were a little ambitious, but what happened is that it got off the ground, and then I began to work with Ray Trethaway, who at that time was working with Ann Cole to put some structure to the Tree Foundation. And so we folded our program into theirs. And, to this day, Ray Trethaway, teases me about how he knows more about trees than I do, even though, we were there at the beginning. So that's kind of a little bit of my history with trees.
I want to come back. We're going to come back to trees and just the importance of that canopy for all sorts of different reasons. But you talked about when you were in the process of becoming an elected official and being the first, and you are the first LGBT member of SMUD's elected board of directors.
That's right.
People think of this region as a fairly accommodating place and a place where folks of all different types can come together and live, work, recreate, whatever, and all that. I got to ask you, take us back to that moment, because you really had to put yourself out there, I assume, in order to make the decision to really step forward. Put us back in your shoes back then. What were you thinking?
Yeah, It's interesting. When Kim Mueller hired me, I was really worried that would hurt her because of my own homophobia that's inside of me, meaning that I didn't think I'd be accepted because I didn't accept myself.
And what year were we talking about?
That would have been 2000. Well, no, wait, it would have been 1994, I think. And just when she got elected, when I talked to her, it was like, I just want you to know that I'm a lesbian. She said, yeah, I know that. And I said, I'm very active in the community. She said, yeah, I know that. And I said, some people in our district are very anti-gay, and I'm just worried about you. And she looked at me and said, Rosanna, I think you have a bigger problem with this than I do. And that was when I realized my own homophobia, and we got to get this cleaned up if I'm ever going to be in a position to run for office. Well, I worked with her for 4 years. She left. The district wasn't ready for a gay person, but we did recruit Darrell Steinberg, and hey, he turned out pretty good, didn't he? And so then I went on to work at SMUD, but it was in 2017 that I ran for SMUD the first time, and it was scary for me. Genevieve Sharoma was, one of my strongest supporters, and I thank her for that. There were people who said awful things about me for being gay, who posted on, Facebook. about me, I even had a couple of people, say things to my face and slam the door. But by then, I realized that who I am is just fine.
Sure.
And so it didn't bother me as much. And our campaign was about the issues, which, I had worked at SMUD for 20 years, and I know what we need to do for our customers. You keep the rates low, you keep the lights on, you do green programs, and you have excellent customer service. And that's what I ran on, and people, it didn't matter to them, which was great. And I was reelected in 2022, which it's getting a little stranger now, I have to say.
How so?
Well, in Rockland and Roseville, we have school boards that want to ban books, that want to out transgender kids in high school. And let me tell you, sometimes parents can't deal with this. They freak out and they throw kids out on the street. The highest percentage of suicide is with transgender kids. And so, kids need us to stand up for them. They need to see that there are people out there who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. I think because of past elections where, one year we elected a president who became much more open about saying negative things about Muslims, about people of color, and even LGBTQ, that has rekindled this fire of looking at people as others. They're strange, they're weird, so we don't want them to be part of our community. And, that's not the way our country was run.
Well, to kind of take a thread there in terms of strange, weird, and not a part of our community. One of the things, Jessica, that I've come to learn that really surprised me, that actually has a relationship to the work that you do, is that when people are marginalized, for whatever reason, decisions on things like land use and the allocation of amenities tends to suffer. And so you have spoke on the issue of how the trees are actually a bit of a proxy for how we view and invest into communities. Can you share a little bit about what you were talking about when you mentioned that?
Yeah, so it's a sort of a concept called tree equity. And really what you can think about is historical redlining in communities. And you can look at a redlining map and a tree canopy map of our city or the region, or pick any city really in the U.S., and you'll see that those two correlate greatly. What that has to do with a lot of times is how we view public spaces and public land. So in very affluent areas, you'll have what are called street trees, and those are typically between the road or the curb and the sidewalk, and typically they're taken care of by the city, right? You may own that property, but there's an easement and, yes, you can plant things, but we're going to restrict what you can plant. In areas that are not as affluent, you won't even see that area of space allocated. So there'll just be a sidewalk. There's no trees. So what that does is it puts a greater burden on the people living there to have trees. And if you're in an area that doesn't have a lot of money, it doesn't mean you don't care about trees. What it actually means is they're not your top priority, right? If you think of like Maslow's triangle, right? The hierarchy
of needs,
right? If you don't feel safe in your community, you can't think about trees. And that's okay, right? So sort of the way that I think about community, trees are a part of the solution. They're not the only solution.
Of course.
So at the Tree Foundation, we have programs called neighborhoods where we embed ourselves in communities. And a lot of times what that looks like is going to community meetings and fairs and everything, and not bringing up opinions, but sitting there and listening and not saying, this is what you should do in your community, but what would you like to do and how can we help you? Sometimes the how can we help you has nothing to do with trees, and that's okay, because this is our long-term strategy to make, everywhere have the benefits of trees, right? We talk about different jurisdictions, different neighborhoods, but when you have trees, they don't know geopolitical boundaries. They just know what they're doing. So trees everywhere help air pollution, right? It's not just about, well, I have a tree in my yard. If it's in my neighbor's yard, it's helping me too.
I'm curious about this, though, because, I grew up understanding that this was the city of trees already. So from from maybe some folks' perspective, we've arrived. Everyone wants to be like Sacramento because we were known as the city of trees. So, Sacramento has been held up as kind of like the model. So are you saying that reputation, while maybe at one point it was earned, that we got to keep working at it?
Yes and no. So I will say the goal is trees are critical infrastructure. They are the only thing in terms of infrastructure that accrue over time. So you earn more benefits from trees the longer they're in the ground. Your car, if you went out and got a car today, as soon as you drive it off the lot, it starts losing your value. Our trees gain value over time, right? And the thing about infrastructure is you have to take care of it. If we paved a road once in 1950, and then never paved it again, you'd have to care for it, right? You'd have to repave. So it's not that, well, we're here and we never have to do anything. You still have to maintain and care for your trees. And I think Sacramento is a wonderful model. And the way to think about it is, how do we go further, right? You can be two things. You can be the farm and fort capital, and you can be the city of trees. We can honor everything, right? Because this is an inclusive city, and we care about what our citizens and our residents care about. We want to be all things to all people, and trees help provide that beautiful community. But really focusing on where we put the trees now is really important. How do we create that tree equity? How do we fix historical injustices and wrongs is where we need to go for the future. That still means that those trees that are falling down after the storms, we need to replace those. And we need to think about planning. We need to think about, well, this area has no trees. How do we get trees here? And how do we make the tree so it's not just the burden of a homeowner, but it's the whole community that's playing a part with those trees?
Mm-hmm. So when you talk about the community playing a part with those trees, I think, Rosanna, a lot about some of the work that SMUD does that I don't think many people are aware of. For instance, as a real estate developer myself, one of the things on one of my projects, Township 9, that I was doing many years ago, SMUD came in and actually did an assessment when we were building what we called an urban park in trying to help us figure out, along with the Tree Foundation, actually, to figure out how is it that we were going to essentially program the treescape for the area. What led SMUD to get involved in something that doesn't necessarily seem directly connected to power generation and assume such a role to where it is that you're giving advice, I should say, to developers on how to build out the communities that they're conceiving?
It's a great question. And I'll tell you that it might surprise some people, but the mission of SMUD is to make our customers' lives better. That is the mission of SMUD.
Beyond power.
Beyond power. I mean, you see what we do with, the reliability of power and generating power, but we're community owned, not for profit. So when you're community owned, you do exist to make your customers' lives better. Now, the stuff that was done to help you is certainly related to the amount of energy usage that your buildings or your areas would have. Looking at the orientation of the sun and looking at where trees should be planted and where buildings should be. Those are all things that are going to benefit everybody because you'll use less energy, and the people who come to your development are going to enjoy the amenities better, whether it's trees or sidewalks or other things that are done. You know, it's our job to make you have the best development. And what makes a development good? Well, certainly a lot of these amenities like trees, sidewalks, bushes, but also the buildings need to be energy efficient. And I think that, you know, SMUD has always had that as one of our core values, that we all are better off when you use less energy. Now, that probably sounds funny because we're in a utility company, and if you use less, then we're going to get less of your money. But what we are about is serving the community. So we do help developers. We do help residential folks. You know, we are involved in so many things that weren't even imagined when I was there. I worked at SMUD for 20 years and I left in 2012. But even during the pandemic, we had some of our employees helping the smaller chambers that were really struggling to stay open, because we knew if they were open, they could help small businesses, and that would make our community stronger. And we give time to our employees to go out and volunteer with different organizations. And every organization imaginable we have been involved with. So it's really about...
In following that, what is it that SMUD wants to achieve through its relationship with the Tree Foundation? I mean, again, it's not necessarily for most of us intuitive how your two organizations would be connected. And I would really think that we would all like to know what looks like success in terms of your partnership with the Tree Foundation.
It's a great question, too. Well, we started this, way back with David Freeman, the cowboy who came to town.
The one who shut down Rancho Seco,
Yes,
right?
He did shut down Rancho Seco, but actually it was the voters who did. But we brought him in to make sure that we could survive without the energy that was created there. And he had a very novel approach, and he said, instead of having to generate all this excess power from Rancho Seco, we're going to give you a tree, and that's going to, give you air conditioning in the sense of giving you shade. But he helped us get customers to do the change out of all kinds of equipment that was using a lot more energy than efficient ones. So air conditioners, refrigerators, HVAC systems. He got us started on the energy efficiency angle, but it evolved into more of the beauty that trees bring too. We've got to think about that, how they increase your house value. That was thought about. But now we're into a terrible time with climate change. And if we don't do some concrete actions quickly...
Are you sure you want to use the word concrete?
That is a bad one, although they are putting carbon into concrete now. And so we're getting rid of some of the carbon that way. But it's, trees they have so many values. So what would success look like? I think already we've had tremendous success, but we can always do better. And that's the new approach that the Tree Foundation has given us, where we are going into underserved communities and we are working with their programs to make sure that trees are planted in those neighborhoods that are underserved, that haven't received the same amount of attention as other neighborhoods. And our goal this year, I think, is to plant 2,000 of the 10,000 trees we intend to plant in underserved communities. So, we're all in this together. And we're very pleased with the trees that have been planted. And we want to look at giving people shrubs.
I'm going to ask you the same question.
Yeah.
What looks like success?
So I do want to highlight this program when it started was the only program. We talked about Sacramento being a model, right? The
Sure.
City of Trees. It was the only program that trees weren't used as a greenwashing or a nice to have thing.
Hold on, wait a minute. Greenwashing.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Okay, that sounds like, what is it called with like drug money or something like that? It's called a whitewashing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
I don't know what it's called.
I don't know what it's called.
Tell us what greenwashing is.
So greenwashing is companies who really, you see it a lot in the sustainability sector. Companies who, they're not necessarily going to change their business practices, but they're going to partner with an organization and say, look at all this wonderful thing we do. And I want to highlight that is not what SMUD's doing. And when it started, what Rosanna talked about was it was highlighting how do we change people's behaviors using trees, right? So if you have an air conditioning running in the full sun and you have an air conditioning running under the shade of your tree, the one under the shade of a tree will be more efficient. It will use less power. It won't need to run as frequently. So really, when the program started in the early 90s, it was focused on that. It was focused on how do we change behaviors and patterns. And I think the wonderful thing about this partnership is that it has evolved over the years to take best practices and say, how do we make community better? Right. And so the Tree Foundation looks at community through the lens of trees, obviously, and potentially shrubs. But how do we do this together, and how do we build this community to make it stronger and more resilient? Right. So with climate change, how do we change the type of trees we're planting so that they're not only good for right now, but they're good 100 years in the future?
Give us an example of that.
Of a tree?
Of a tree. Making sure you're planting the right tree, that the tree for today is a tree for tomorrow, say 100 years from now. What's the opposite of that? A tree that explodes in year 5 or something like that?
No. So there's actually a really apt example right now, and it's the redwood. A redwood, I'm from the East Coast originally, and being in California, redwoods are iconic. And every time I go back east, people want redwood things. It's what people think of in terms of trees when they come to California. Redwoods are built for moist environments, and typically environments that don't get as hot as Sacramento does. So if you think about the Bay Area, redwoods do great there, right? It's wet. It's lots of, you can't really grow tomatoes there as well, so the climate's different, even though it's very close. So redwoods, although they're iconic and beautiful, I would never plant a redwood in Sacramento today. I love them. I think they're beautiful, but they just aren't adapted to this area.
Is that the reason that the redwoods occasionally in Capitol Park fall down?
It's one of the reasons, yeah. So when we're thinking about what trees look like in the future, we know it's going to be hotter. It's going to be drier. When we do have rain events, they're going to be bigger, right? When we have storms, it's going to be bigger and longer. We're going to have drier days and then areas of monsoons. So thinking about that, we look to other areas of the world that have similar climates to that. So South Africa is a great place right now to look for our plants. As is Australia and New Zealand. And actually, the desert Southwest is a place where we're getting some really unique cultivars that we're testing out to see how does this work.
So if we're looking to replace a tree or plant a tree in our own yard
Yep.
today, okay, 30 years from now, we might be thinking about what, and today we should be thinking about what?
So I would say both times you should be thinking about how much space you have.
Okay.
And what are your goals of your tree, right? So I love to garden. If I plant a tree that's going to get very large in my yard, I may not be able to garden in 30 years. That may be fine for me, but it may not be. So you want to think about how are you going to use your space. This is much how cities think about planting trees as well, right? How are we going to use the space? What do we put in our parks? How do we make sure that these trees are lasting long term? So I would say, what are you going to use the space for? What do you value, right? For a very long time in the green movement, people would say, oh, I'm planting a tree for carbon, which is really great. But some people just think they're pretty. And that's okay, right?
Right.
We want people to love and appreciate trees for whatever reason they do. It doesn't have to be, this beautiful, for the longest time, people always ask, what's your favorite tree? I hate that question because in the tree world, people assign, values. I like oaks because, they're
mighty and powerful,
right?
Strong, yeah.
Right?
Yes.
But typically, what's your favorite tree has to do with a memory that you have. That you and it could be totally emotional and non-logical, and that's good.
Like that elm tree.
Like that elm tree for my mother. And so, my favorite tree is an invasive species, and I love it. I still love it. I have memories
What
of
is
it
it?
growing up. It's Paulownia tomentosa. It's a royal Paulownia. It's from China and Japan, and I grew up around Philly, and the pods were used as ballast in ships. So there's a famous park in Philly called Fairmount Park that when the ships would come to harbor, they'd blow out the seeds. So the entire park was lined with Paulownia tomentosa, and immigrants moved in, and it was really used as dowry wood. So under the cover of night, people would go in and chop down these empress trees to use them as dowry wood, which is
Really?
That's crazy.
crazy, bizarre story, right? But to me, and they're, in New Jersey, you see them on highways and you're like, oh, they have these big, beautiful flowers. They're purple. There's actually one in Capitol Park. And to me, I just love that tree. That doesn't mean I'd plant it everywhere. I wouldn't advocate planting it, but that's okay, right? Not everyone has to say an oak is my favorite. It could be a crepe myrtle, right? Because you like flowers, and that's okay. So I think back to your original question, really focusing on what are your goals? Do you want to shade your air conditioner? Do you want to have a tree that's just good to have a meal under?
What's surprising me about what you're saying, Jessica, is that's so much more intentional than I would assume. I was more assuming that you were going to come from a place of trees. It doesn't matter what it is, as long as it's green and as it grows, just plant trees. But that is a much more thoughtful approach to trees. And you end up with neighborhoods like, I know you live in Rosanna in the Curtis Park neighborhood.
Yes, I do.
And if ever there was a neighborhood that was a joy to walk in, it's Curtis Park. Mm-hmm. And it's because, in fact, while the architecture is beautiful and you all keep your streets really nice and the neighbors are all wonderful, but the trees really are kind of the crowning, to make a bit of a pun, are the crowning glory of that neighborhood. So, and I don't know whether in those days it was random or intentional, but somehow it worked, right?
It absolutely did. And I love Curtis Park. I chose that area because of the trees. And it's now a neighborhood that a lot of people can't afford. So that's, one reason why we've got to plant more trees in the right place. And I hope that we can continue to plant trees, but I also want to see the bushes too. And why? Because they absorb the carbon. They're beautiful. And, sometimes they're easier to care for than trees. Mm-hmm. When we first got involved in the Tree Foundation program, there were some struggles around tree stewardship. And we've worked really hard to put together educational materials and to do different things so that people don't feel like this is my tree and if I don't pay attention to it, it'll be fine. You have to care for your trees just like you care for your children. Well, probably not just like, but if you don't take care of trees or sidewalks or streets, they deteriorate.
You know, though, I have to tell you, I think a lot of times people don't know where to go. You know, you see something wrong with your tree, or you see something wrong with a tree in a park or something like that. I don't have a sense that people feel very empowered.
That's an interesting observation. You might be right. That might be a part of it.
Who do we call? Do we call you or
so? Yeah, you call me direct. No, you can absolutely reach out to the
and we will be providing Jessica's direct number at the end of this podcast.
My cell phone. You just text constantly. No, so you can call the Tree Foundation, and if we are not the right people, we will put you on the path. Typically, trees and parks, you can call 311. Or in Sacramento and report it, and people will come out. The city of Sacramento has wonderful arborists, as do a lot of the cities and counties surrounding the city of Sacramento. So it's quite wonderful. But if you ever have a concern, you can feel free to reach out to the Tree Foundation and we'll help, even if you didn't get the trees through us. So the Tree Foundation is the only nonprofit in the world that cares for the trees from seed to slab. And so what that means is we have people harvesting acorns, growing them, planting them. Our partnership with SMUD, where anyone in Sacramento County can get up to 10 free trees.
Really?
Yeah.
Yes.
I didn't know that.
And maybe bushes.
I hope so.
Yeah. And Rosanna's right. You know, shrubs are really a great way to sequester carbon. And anyone can have a shrub. If you live in an area and you're in an apartment, you're not really going to put a tree necessarily in your apartment, right? But you can put a shrub on your balcony, right? And it's still beauty and it can provide that benefit. So there is that beautiful synergy of plants, and that's great, right? That doesn't say that trees aren't, worthy. It's just saying wherever we can get green, we want it. We know that when humans are around nature, even if it's looking at a screen, we can see their blood pressure lower, cortisol levels lower. So we're seeing stress decrease. Just being around green, looking at a picture of nature will actually do that.
Well, turning to the whole issue of sustainability, and sustainability, Rosanna, is such a big issue for SMUD. And you have this initiative and all of the good works that you've been doing over the years. It makes me wonder, when you talk about these programs, 10 free trees, there are neighborhoods, particularly in low-income areas, where trees have died, or they're just spots of nothing but dirt and all that. Do people know about your programs to the extent that you would hope they would?
I would say no. I would say there's always more room for education. And I think that's where we're sort of pivoting and trying to have more of an outreach and education. Our programs have been steeped in science, and a lot of times they appeal to people who already care about trees. People who maybe trees aren't on their, priority list. Our programs aren't targeted the same way. We've done a lot of new novel marketing techniques with SMUD and with other organizations to appeal. We do classroom programs for youth. We have some adult education programs for how do you care for your tree? How do you prune it? How do you water it? Even something as simple as watering is important for people to be aware of. And then we have a program that's called Urban Wood Rescue. So when a tree does fall down, that's not the end of it. We can bring it in rather than it going to the dump. And Rosanna's talking about carbon. A lot of times those trees just go straight to the dump and they get buried in plastic. That doesn't help, right?
No, it does not.
Or they get chipped, which is better, but still not great. So we have a program where we actually take large fallen trees, we mill them, we kiln dry them, and we make them available for sale. And then additionally, we also have a wood donation program. So if you are a school and you want to put in a school garden and have planter boxes and benches, you call up the Tree Foundation and we will make sure you get what you need donated to you.
That actually raises a really important question because for both of you, how are your organizations individually, but also maybe collectively in partnership with each other, winning hearts and minds of our young people? Because ultimately, they're inheriting this city, this world, and they're the ones who are going to have to care and take forward the work that both of you are involved with. What are you doing, Rosanna, to make sure that young people, particularly those in those tough-to-reach communities, are hearing how they can play a role in helping to improve not only their environment, but frankly, the planet itself?
Yes, absolutely. Well, there's a variety of ways. Let me tell you, SMUD loves students. We love students. We have a big group of folks who do a variety of things. Like, for example, we have some folks who do just education around different sources of energy. We also have students that are building all kinds of different things related to energy. They're learning about carbon zero. The thing is, these young people, they get it. They totally get it. I think more so than some of us older adults. They're willing to make changes in their lives to be able to have a planet that is not coming undone. So, we're now looking at putting solar on top of schools that, go along with all of our other school programs. We've had contests where we've asked high school kids to tell us what they think is most important about being zero carbon, and the ideas that they come up with are tremendous. But we want those kids to work at SMUD too. So we are providing scholarships for kids to study math and science. We are creating intern programs where once they get going, they can have internships at SMUD and see what that is like, and if they want to be part of the mission of SMUD. So that is one of our biggest areas of outreach, is connecting with students at all different levels.
What about you, Jessica?
Yeah, so we have a program called Seed to Seedling where we go into classrooms. We also, our big thing is sort of partnership, right? So we know that, we are an organization of 35 people, which is a lot smaller than SMUD. So we know we can't do it all by ourselves. So how do we partner with other organizations to get there? So, we do summer camps with Sacramento Splash. We look for any partnership where we can have overlap, right? SMUD works out really well because Rosanna talked about SMUDs for the community and building that community support. We also look at workforce development grants so that we can go into communities and actually be able to train and hire them, and that there's a pipeline for people to have real paying jobs. Like one of the things for me is that I have a PhD in this. I love trees, but not everyone does. And that's okay, right? So how do you create programs where people can appreciate the different aspects of trees? Urban Wood Rescue is a great example. You may not love trees, but this table is made of trees. Can you appreciate that? So it's our messaging around and entry points for kids, right? How do we get kids to think about different things? And I will agree. I think Rosanna is right. Kids are well equipped. It's the and. How do you not say, well, you can have trees, but you have to give this up? How do we think about our spaces in a different way so that you can have trees and Frisbee golf and skate parks, right? How do you think about all of those across a continuum rather than just saying, well, we're going to plant a forest here? Because that's not what people are looking for. What they're looking for is a sense of community.
Speaking of forest, there is a term that I saw recently, and I was hoping that you might be able to explain what it means.
Yep.
What is an urban forest?
Yeah, so it's really lovely. It's what I want you to think about and take away is just trees and people. That's really what urban forestry is. It's the management of trees for people. So a lot of great examples is traditional forestry, we're managing for lumber, or we're managing to mitigate our risk, right? We want to reduce forest fires. But if a tree falls down in the forest, that's okay, right? For the large part. If a tree falls down in the city, it is going to hit a car, a house, and maybe damage someone's life.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So trees in cities and urban forestries is all about preventative maintenance, right? It's the same thing about like brushing your teeth so you don't get cavities. So thinking about it that way is really helpful. You know, a lot of times we'll get people who say, you know, like my mother, they're going to remove this tree and I love this tree and I don't see anything wrong with it, right? And sometimes that's a really hard point because you may not see something, but there is a trained professional that can see the decay in that tree and can see that tree falling on your house.
Let me ask you, how well do we take care of our trees in Sacramento? And I want to give you a test.
Okay.
Okay?
All right.
So you have a PhD in
Urban and community forestry.
Urban and community forestry, and you are a certified arborist.
I am.
So that makes you a connoisseur of trees.
I think so.
Okay. So I'll start here. Capitol Park. How well are those trees maintained?
I think that there is...
On an A through F level.
Oh, boy.
Oh. On a whole...
Come on, no one's going to hear this.
C+.
Okay, no one.
Oh, C plus.
C+.
Really?
I'm also a very hard grader.
She is.
I don't
yes.
think that anyone's going to get an A from me.
We
I'm
won't
going to be
tell
very
anybody.
honest. Don't. No one listening to this. I'm sorry.
Land Park.
Higher, probably a B, solid B.
Okay. What either community or park is most at risk that you've wandered through that really needs some TLC right now?
I think I live in Oak Park, so I think McClatchy Park. There are elms in McClatchy Park that I visit daily and I look at, and they're not doing great. Just similar to how you were talking about Dutch elm disease. They have some dieback and disease going on. So that is always on my mind because that's where I live. I'm sure if I lived somewhere else, I'd say, fix this park, you know.
Did you notice the 15 trees that were planted there?
I did. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually did.
SMUD employees and myself, we went out one Friday morning and planted 15 trees. It's just a great feeling.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Nice. Mm-hmm. Nice. Well, that's one way to get folks involved, right?
Yes. Yes.
Now I have to ask you, the tough question for you is, you may have gone out and did 15 trees, okay? How many of your fellow board members also helped plant trees?
Oh, let me tell you all of them.
Now we're going to get
true.
to see the real.
This is true. I can tell you. The board loves trees. We love trees so much. Staff has to say, calm down. We're spending a lot of money on trees. We don't have more than this to spend. We all love trees. So I wish you would ask me a question I could really give you some dirt on, but that is not one.
We just want to make sure that everybody's walking the talk over.
Oh, yeah, they are. There's no doubt. No doubt.
So, Rosanna, as we're looking forward to the future and trying to reinforce and build this urban forest that we call home, what are some of the things that excite you the most that are coming up on the horizon that we can anticipate or maybe even get involved with?
Oh, yes. Well, for me, the excitement is our 2030 zero carbon plan. And what that is that SMUD intends to be zero carbon in its production of electricity by 2030. Right now, we have 5 gas plants, and we're going to retire 2 of them right away. And as we build more solar and wind and get more geothermal, then we will be looking at closing a few other plants. But if we find another fuel that we can use, like hydrogen, those gas plants could have more life and we could get more uses out of them. But this 2030 zero carbon plan is for everybody. Like, you can go to the SMUD website, sign up for it, and we'll get you a t-shirt. The reason I'm excited about it is because it really is going to make a difference in the future of our planet. There is no doubt in my mind that if we don't start taking more action now, we're going to be in a much worse place. So I'm excited about igniting communities around this issue. And I can tell you, there's excitement already, even in the underserved communities who may not have as many dollars to spend or may not, have as much information. There is excitement around saving our planet. I went door to door and talked to folks who were interested in changing out their gas stove for electric. And by the way, that gas stove emits all kinds of terrible fumes in your home that you breathe that aren't healthy for you. People who said, hey, I'll look at changing out my hot water heater. It's pretty easy to do, and SMUD gives a huge rebate for it. So that's exciting to me when you go door to door and people are willing to get on board with this bigger vision of being carbon zero by 2030 that will help our planet and our community.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And Jessica, as you look forward, what's on the horizon that you're most excited about?
Yeah, so I think about this. I mean, how much time do I have left? Because I can take it all. I will say I look forward to it in a lot of different ways. So I recently moved less than a mile from where I lived before. And I had this wonderful neighbor, Albert. And Albert has lived in that neighborhood for 84 years.
Wow.
He's 84 years old.
Now, this is in Oak Park?
In Oak Park,
Okay.
yeah, on 43rd Street. He is a wonderful human being, and he is the fabric of that neighborhood and that community. And for me, it's those little wins. It's going and sitting with him and talking to him about, he has a house that he now owns outright, and how do we get these programs from SMUD for him in a way that works for him, right? So it may be me going and sitting with him and doing energy audits. That to me is really exciting because we're making a real change in one person's life. And every time you make a change for one person, the community benefits. So I think that's wonderful. I also think the city has their urban forest plan coming up. That's really exciting. The general plan is being redone, and really, we can plant trees everywhere, but we have to think about smart ways to sort of fix the historical injustices, right? If you don't have a space to plant a tree, that's going to be the problem. So
Sure.
How do we reimagine our areas to allow for trees? So I think for me, the future is positive. The future is greener. Mm-hmm. It's beautiful. And it's all about getting together and building community. And community looks in all sorts of ways. And that's what I'm excited about.
I love that. So my last question for both of you is this. If you were going to take someone on a walk that had just come to town and you wanted them to see the beauty of the tree canopy of Sacramento, what is the walk or even just a spot to sit that you would take them to that you enjoy the most? And Rosanna, I'll start with you.
Well, I mean, I would have to say Curtis Park. I just love Curtis Park. The actual
You see
park.
what an advocate she is?
I hear it.
The
Yeah.
park itself, though, it's so beautiful. And there's a track around it. It's a mile. I've walked this track with Jessica more than once. It's just beautiful. You feel like you really are in the outdoors in a special place. So that's mine.
And Jessica, you get the last word.
Yeah, I will say, so I moved here 3 years ago, and when I arrived, and I still feel this way, I feel like I'm in paradise. Growing up in the Northeast, we did, fruit trees were figs if you were lucky, and that you had to cover them in, blankets all winter. Arriving and having oranges, that's amazing. Like, I don't think people in Sacramento really appreciate how amazing that is. I moved here from DC. DC also has 2 rivers. I would not swim in either one anywhere near the city. Like, you drive like an hour and a half to swim in those rivers. We have beautiful rivers. So I think sort of my response is anywhere. I would take them anywhere because there's so many unique parks. There are so many unique neighborhoods that you can experience the beauty. And I think the best way to experience Sacramento is through the eyes of someone where this is brand new. Like going to Capitol Park and saying, I got an orange from a tree in Capitol Park. That is still to this day, it is mind blowing to me that exists. I have a house where I have a lemon tree and I'm like texting family saying, when I come visit, do you want some lemons? And they're like, oh, what are you going to bring us to?
That is a very cool
Limoncello.
Yeah. Right. So flying
easy to make
with Sacramento like fruit. That is insane to me. I know the palm trees, technically it's a grass. To me, palms mean you're at the beach. And so when I sit on my front porch and I can hear and see the palm trees of Broadway, that's so cool. So I think there's so many gems that I can't eliminate. I can't take you down to one. I'm sorry.
All right, you hit me where I live. So as the former manager of the Tower Theater on Broadway, I can tell you, palm trees.
Right.
Big deal.
Yeah.
Rather than say a favorite place that I have right now, I'll tell you a place that I am so looking forward to seeing in the future that I know that the Tree Foundation is very much a part of, and I believe SMUD is as well. And that is the new cherry blossom walkway and park. Mm-hmm. It's called the Hanami.
Yep, Hanami line.
Hanami line.
Hanami
that's going to be right off of the Sacramento River, near the confluence of the American River at Matsui Park, right?
Yep.
Yes.
So stay tuned, folks, because that's going to be amazing. Well, I'd like to thank both of you for taking the time to be with us today. And I'd also like to thank SMUD for their support in launching this podcast and express our heartfelt gratitude to the Department of Sound and especially John Hamilton and his team for their exceptional work in producing this series. Stay tuned for more captivating conversations with influential individuals and organizations as we continue to explore the path towards SMUD's ambitious goal of a zero carbon 2030. And with that, I am Scott Syfax. Thank you for the time. We'll see you soon right here. And good day.